And I believe that that's the worst mistake that a young adult or young child can make in these juvenile detention centers, is to convince themselves that this is not that bad, because it makes coming home and committing other offenses easy, because you can already convince yourself that going to the juvenile detention center is not that bad.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
Hi, today we welcome along Tyrone Walker. After serving nearly 25 years in prison, Tyrone earned a certificate in business and entrepreneurship through the Georgetown Pivot Program. His Pivot Program internship with the Justice Policy Institute led to a full-time position in which he used his lived experience and subject matter expertise to effect policy changes. There, Tyrone spent 2 years advocating for sentencing reform and managing JPI's projects around DC's Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act and Second Chance Amendment Act. As Director of Reentry Services with the Prisons and Justice Initiative, he supports students with their re-entry needs both before and after release. He believes that helping our men and women while they're still on the inside is the most effective way to bridge the gap towards a successful re-entry. When he's not working, he's taking classes online to earn his bachelor's degree in political science. Tyrone, we were introduced in a convoluted way via Jan Banning, who'd engaged with the work of Mark Howard, Director of the Prisons and Justice Initiative, who recommended you as likely to be a great guest. So we're really delighted to have you along today. Welcome.
No, thank you for having me.
Hi Tyrone, really nice to meet you, and thanks for coming along today. So you were 19 when you were arrested and imprisoned. What was it like going to prison at that sort of age?
That's a great question. Going to prison at the age of 19, still being confused about life and not knowing really what to expect. And when I got to the DC jail at that time, I was surrounded by so many people who I had grew up with in the various communities throughout the District of Columbia. You know, DC is very small. It got 4 quadrants, or what we call it: northwest, northeast, southeast, and southwest. You know, you can be standing on one side of the street and be in northeast, and just cross the other side of the street, you'll be in northwest. So it's very small. So a number of us grew up together throughout the various wards in the district within these quadrants. A lot of those same people were, not only did I see them in juvenile detention centers, I also saw the same people in adult facilities. So that was a smoother transition, but personally I was struggling. And that's not something that I felt that I could talk to others about, especially my peers. But I did find someone eventually to talk about my struggles with, who was an older gentleman who had been incarcerated for nearly 20 years when I met him.
I was just thinking it was quite depressing to hear how many people you knew there were, you know, as if that was kind of like a familiar route that people took. That seems quite bleak, really.
Yes, Naomi, you got to think, like, a lot of people that come from the communities that I come from often come from what we call food desert communities that's been redlined, you know, since the inventions of them. That has been heavily infected by drugs, alcohol, prostitution, everything that was illegal. And so a lot of us have never seen another way of life. When you look outside of the window in our communities, people were selling drugs. You know, people were using drugs. When we stepped outside, it was the same thing. And for a number of us, that was actually happening in the household. So you living around it, you sleeping around it, your whole life is engulfed with it. And for me, I know that I wanted to do different things with my life, but didn't see a role model to help me get there. And that was very painful.
We've spoken recently, Tyrone, with people who have researched the juvenile system over here and the transition which a lot of our young men have to make from the juvenile system into the adult prison system, and the kind of difficulties that they've faced in doing that. It sounds as if you were kind of on the cusp of that transition. Is that right? Have I got that right?
I've actually experienced the transition from the juvenile detention centers. And I often talk about one of the mistakes that we make going through the juvenile detention center is we begin to convince ourselves that this is not that bad. So when you transition into the adult system, you already have so much familiarity about the prison system from the juvenile detention system that you can already convince yourself that this is not that bad. And when you go into the adult system, it's the same type of system. And I believe that that's the worst mistake that a young adult can make, or a juvenile can make, or a young child can make in these juvenile detention centers, is to convince themselves that this is not that bad, because it makes coming home and committing other offenses easy, because you can already convince yourself that going to the juvenile detention center, it's not that bad. And I often tell them that this is the worst thing that really can happen to you. And I always tell them, like, never like to think that this is not that bad. And I always give them the worst picture is that just think about it. You can't use the restroom not unless somebody give you some toilet paper. I'm like, once you realize how inhumane that is and how dehumanizing that is, like, that should keep your thinking away from realizing that this is not that bad. This is the worst thing that could ever have happened to you.
It sounds as if something which would distort somebody's thinking for most of the rest of their life, in fact.
Yes, and it's, David, and it's just not just what, it didn't just like start with me. Like my mother and father were formerly incarcerated. And I often like wonder, like, what did they think about it? And like, how did they survive it? And what were their experiences during their incarceration? I never really got a chance to ask my mother that. But it became so bad as a generational thing for black and brown people that my father and I were bunkies. And that was a very, very eye-opening thing for me to be in the penitentiary with my father, and he to be sleeping on the bottom bunk and I'm sleeping on the top bunk. And that was something that I couldn't deal with, and I just couldn't be around him as being my father. I realized then at the age I had just turned 20 then, so I knew I needed something different. I was 20 years old when my father and I were, bunkies together inside Lorton Penitentiary. I knew I needed something different, and my biological father didn't offer that to me.
It's something I've encountered a couple of times in Britain, actually, people who've been in prison at the same time as their fathers. I think people don't take that into consideration, but how that shapes what you expect out of life when your parents are also ending up in prison. It really sets expectations very differently, doesn't it, than if your parents are going to work or going to university, those sorts of things. It sets your life up very differently. I think you have to be a very strong-minded person to actually see something different to that.
Yes, I mean, Naomi, it wasn't easy, right? Talking to my father, we actually had an altercation one time, and it was about my behavior. Like, I don't think he realized I was still a young adult, and he was screaming at me one day, in front of all these other men, and I flat out, I had that tough conversation with him in front of everyone. I was like, hey, it's too late to play daddy. I have my own time I'm doing it, and I'm doing it my way. I can't do my time your way. I'm doing it my way. And I'm saying if you wanted to be a father, you should have did that in society, not after I received of what I thought at that time, 57 years in prison. It was time for me to be my own man and grow up. And he really didn't like me saying that to him. And I didn't apologize for it. I told him I meant every word of that. Like, I'm like, it's so much of my life, like, when you got arrested, my whole world crumbled. Right? I lost everything that I thought a father was in you because you were gone. And like the things I suffered all the way up until I came to prison and still suffering, you weren't there for me. And I told him, I still love you. I'm always love you. But I also understand that you had your own issues that you had to deal with in life because we all grew up in this same community. And I'm like, I do understand that, but he really didn't like me telling him that he should have been a father in society. I'm like, I'm just only being honest with you about how I feel about it. And it's not easy. So I was secretly going into my case manager office, calling my lawyer, begging her to get me away from him. Because I needed to grow up, right? And I wanted more. And I often talk to my father about it, like, I'm a conversationalist. Even at that time, I knew I liked to conversate and talk to people about life and different things. My father didn't conversate much, and I told him I can't be around you. It's questions I have about life and people and things, but you just not there. And so when I went off into the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I met a man that was a conversationalist. I met a man who infused my being with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And I tell my father, like, this man loved me in a way that you never could have. And I said, I learned something very special from him about being a person and growing up and maturing and not looking at the worst thing that I've done in life, but look forward to changing my life and making things better, not just for myself, but for those around.
How old were you then, Tyrone?
I was 20. I was
Right,
still
so
20. I was 20 going on 21
so that
when
was
I
still
met
quite
him.
soon after you first went into prison for that
Yes.
that period.
I met him like in December 1995. I left Lorton Penitentiary November the 7th, 1995, and I went to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And this man, Lucius McCoy, he changed my life. And I'm very grateful that I met him.
We've spoken to a few philosophers whilst we've been doing this podcast, and I suppose what's come across from those philosophers has been the need for deep conversation and deep thinking that's there in people in prison, and not always getting the opportunity to do that. And it sounds like Lucius McCoy gave you that opportunity to ponder over things in a deep way to help make meaning of them.
Yes, I actually told him, you must be the smartest man in the world. He was 65 when I met him. He had been in 20 years. And it wasn't a question I couldn't answer him that he didn't have an answer to. And if he didn't know the answer right then and there, he'll come back to me like, oh, you remember you asked me about so-and-so? I did this research, and it's this, and he was like, oh, that was a good question you asked me. And it was him who taught me about me. He was like, you realize you got a good memory? I was like, I've never paid any attention to it. He said, I gave you a clue to a crossword puzzle 3 weeks ago, and you still remember the exact word it was. And he said, he said, so you good at crossword puzzle. And that's how I learned to mentor, through him, by spotting young adults, their talents and their gifts, and pointing it out to them, because I know I was confused. No one ever did. This was the first man that ever did that. Like, pointed out, like, hey, you good at this, you good at that. And I was able to, like, piece my life together. And speaking about philosophy, Naomi, and like, I think about it like in the story of the cave, Plato's cave. You know, like those people who are sitting down at the wall and they got this chain on their neck. They can't turn around because there's a shadow on the wall. But what they're steady focuses on is the flickering of the light, which is the symbol of knowledge. As to say that once you come into knowledge, you never go backwards. And that's what I felt like with Lucius every day, even today. I'm always learning something new. I'm always challenging myself. And I learned something special, that you always challenge yourself by jumping into subjects you have no knowledge about. And that's what I learned most special from Lucius.
That's an extraordinary story, actually, Tyrone. And it sounds as if that encounter when you were about 20 was one of the things that changed the direction of your life. So how old were you when you first came into contact with the police?
The first time I came in contact with the criminal justice system was like I was 13 years old. And I do apologize now. I thought I shared the piece with you. It's still a day inside the Daily Beast. I wrote a piece called The First Encounter. It was my first encounter. It was at the age of 13 years old. I was out in the communities. I was selling drugs. And that was an experience. Like, I got arrested. They found some stuff that wasn't mine, and they claimed it was mine. I didn't know any better. But when they got me to the police station, one of the polices, they checked me because they was looking for the drugs, and they couldn't find the drugs that I had. And they came and found some stuff in the mud, said, this is his. And another officer came in while they had me in the holding cell, and he had me pull my pants down to perform the cavity search on me at the age of 13. Prior to that experience, my experience with law enforcement was strictly positive. I was in the Girls and Boys Club, the Metropolitan Girls and Boys Club, the club number 10, up on 14th and Clifton Street. I was on the boxing team. I was on the football team. I had a lot of respect for officers until that experience, right? That left me angry. That left me confused, right? It left me like shameful, right? I couldn't tell somebody that another man stuck his finger in my rectum as a young boy. I didn't want to be looked at as other as being a young boy. That just made me very resentful of law enforcement. That was my first. That was the worst experience that I ever had with law enforcement as a youth. Because normally then, they catch you, lock you up for truancy, take you home. Take you to the station, call your parents, have your parents come get you. But that invasive search at the age of 13 was just dehumanizing. It really left me scarred for a long time.
It does indeed sound like a very abusive experience, Tyrone. And previously, when you've spoken to Naomi, you've referred to having post-traumatic stress disorder as a consequence of incarceration. But it sounds as if this encounter would have been the first step in that. So can you say a bit more about the PTSD?
Well, when you serve a long prison term, and like I served 24 years, 8 months, and 15 days. So your senses is always heightened. You ever know, like, when people get to arguing and things, like, you get this knot in your stomach. Most people don't. Most people ignore that. Well, in the prisons, you always feel that. So your senses is always heightened, or your discernment, or what it's called, is always at a heightened level. And so you're walking around like that for years. And then when you get out in society, like, you having sensory overload, right? You're trying to figure out, like, why is my head spinning so bad? Or why is this happening to me? Right? You trying to understand these things. Then you go through a period of forgetting things. And I mean, like, I'm wanting to say that, that the creator, the universe, like, blessed me with a huge memory storage. To be able to remember my password 4 or 5 times a day for like 3 weeks, constantly resetting it. And I was like, what is wrong? Like, why I can't remember things? It was a period of time that I couldn't access my memories either. That was very painful. And then I started noticing that every week that I was home, the world started slowing down in my mind, because my mind is speeding up. It was moving so fast, and you're trying to keep up with everything that you see, which was signs of PTSD. Right? And I talked with a friend of mine. He's like, how did you figure that out? I was like, I was just getting out, so I realized that I had a computer in my pocket with my cell phone. So I was always Googling stuff like, what causes slight headaches? What does this feel like? And that's how I found out what it was. But no one today is like treating people as who are formerly incarcerated as if they have been in a war. But they have been. They've been in the battle of their lives for a number of years. And like, people don't look at it like that, but they really need to have some type of treatment or service. No, not really treatment, but services where people can have a positive outlet where they can talk to people about the things that they're suffering from.
Well, I think it's hearing the histories of people like yourself, Tyrone, who are describing such powerful and graphic terms what it's like, when you've got that knot in your stomach, when you're on the when you're tense and a ball of tension every moment of every day. And we've heard that actually from several people we've spoken to recently in these podcasts, haven't we, Naomi?
And you wonder, like, and like David and Naomi, not everyone pay attention to it. That's the thing, like, and most of us who do pay attention to it, like, it can be incidents where if you're incarcerated and you walk to a certain area, your stomach just you're not even there, but you just know it's in the atmosphere and there's something going on, and you're like, let me get away from here. Because you can't see where it's at, but it is actually something going on there. And a lot of us feel it. Some of us just don't pay attention to it.
I guess it'd be difficult for the state to acknowledge, because they're responsible for people whilst they're in custody, aren't they? So it'd be difficult for them to acknowledge that people are living in a state of fear for a number of years.
Yes, and they know that, though. They know that, especially here in America, by the prison system, the way it's organized. This is why they classify you with a security classification level according to certain things like your age. If you young in age, so your testosterone tend to be higher. Since you got higher testosterone, you tend to be more violent, as they say. And so this is why they have supermax. This is why they have penitentiaries and mediums and lows and camps. They know how they do that. And one thing that I found that was like amazing to me, because the first time I ever seen it in all my years, And here in America, they have a federal transit center in Oklahoma City. And so what they do, they bring all these people in on the airplane. Some people say your feet never touch the ground in Oklahoma City. That's not true. It's just that they never been off the back of the plane to get on the bus. I have, so I know that's not true. But I learned something special there. The first time I went there in transit, the BOP, the marshals and BOP staff, they were calling people off the plane by gangs. They were saying if you part of this gang, you part of that gang, you part of this gang, that gang, come up. Like, should nobody move? I was like, what is this? I've never seen this. Nobody ever talked about it. I was like, what is this? And he called again and he said, listen, this prison is ran by this gang. So it's in your best interest to come up here so we can put you in the unit with the gang that you're affiliated with. So to your point, they know how violent these institutions are. They very well know.
I think certainly in Britain we get fed a bit of a diet of American prisons. Actually, there's an awful lot of documentaries featuring American prisons, and you can almost smell the fear as you watch the programme. And what you see is mainly the prison officers' fear within that, the way that they're not interacting with people because they're huddled together. And you think, well, actually, if the staff are that frightened, the prisoners must be frightened also, and they have no respite from that. They're, you're in that space for 24 hours. But yeah, they look to be very frightening places, with the gang culture being so prevalent.
Yes, and like most of them doing it like to try to survive. Most of them are being adopted into gangs, and I've been fortunate. I've never been a part of the gang my whole time of incarceration. Not that I just didn't understand the culture. I was around before this gang culture became what it is today. Mm-hmm. But it's really frightening when you see the way that they just go through life. I've seen them where some factions of gang will be more prevalent inside of an institution. When another person from another faction of a gang get there, he never even make it to what they call general population to start living his life, because he may have they may have to go inside the hole, or they may have jumped on them or something like. And I just never understood that life. But the prison system know exactly what's going on there.
What made you decide to try and use your experience of incarceration to better yourself? Was the turning point meeting Lucius McCoy, or were there other factors as well?
It was a combination of that. It was a combination. I've always wanted to do something with my life. As I mentioned earlier, just didn't see how I was going to get there or how to do it. Right? That was something that I really didn't understand, like what I had to do. Then meeting Lucius, and before I met Lucius, like when I grew up, I wanted to be like Perry Mason. I wanted to be an attorney. But I didn't know anyone even in my household who had went to school. But I never knew like how to go about becoming an attorney, or how to even study to learn how to even finish, high school and junior high school. I didn't learn those things, let alone learn how to apply for college. Didn't know how I was going to do all those things. So the most prevalent. So I still had those things. That was still a burning desire in me. And so when I met Lucius, he showed me how to do those things. Like education was there. So Lucius was also my tutor. Lucius showed me, he tutored me in just about all 5 of my subjects for my GED. So he helped prep me to earn my GED. Once I earned my GED, then I went directly into college in the prison at Allegheny Community College in Cumberland, Maryland.
Can really hear the profound impact that that relationship had on you, and it's hard not to see that as related to your wish to be a role model to other people who are re-entering society. What are the important features about being a role model, do you think? I mean, you mentioned already having someone point out what your strengths are and appreciating and valuing those. Are there other elements of being a good mentor that you notice?
Yes, listening, like just listening to people, and like not just hearing them, but like listening. You're looking for the stimuli that are not spoken. Like, and then something I learned that was important about Lucius about getting to know people. He taught me that, like, you don't really. He was telling me about one of the guys I knew in the prison. He's like, you don't know. He was like, he asked me things like, what's his mother name? What's his father name? Do he have any children? Do he have any siblings? And he said, like, if you don't know these things about a person, you just know of that person. You don't know anything intimate about that person. So he taught me the difference of how to, like, who did I know as a person, and who did I know a person just knowing of that person. Those are things that I use today, and I didn't realize it until he taught me that, how much of a difference that made for me, because people I do know, I mean, I know their families, I know intimate things about them, I know the things that make them smile and things like that. And so in mentoring, I use those same components. I learn about who's my mentee's father, do they have any children? Like, because a lot of these young adults do have children.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's their child name, or what's their children name? And how much of a father are they being in their lives? Like, and helping them to see some of the mistakes that not only that they're making, that we've all made, because there's no perfect person in the world.
Sounds like what he offered you was an understanding that emotionally intimate relationships are important.
Yes, I believe those are very important, because they, all days are not going to be alike. So they're going to have their bad days, their bad moments, but we have to still understand that that's still the same person that we know. Right? And something I always tell them, that when you call a person a friend, I want you to understand that you accept everything that come along with that person as being your friend. The good and the bad of them. That's still your friend, if you're calling that person a friend. I understand that we do have differences in life, but that's what makes us unique. And I think a lot of times, because I do a lot of mentoring with the young adults, that they don't see that. And it's not talked about to them in that way.
Do you think that's more of an issue for males generally in society, trying to needing to be shown ways to develop more emotionally intimate relationships? Do you think that's something that young men generally have more difficulty struggling with?
Yes, according to the brain science, they do. They develop in one way, but they're lagging behind emotionally and socially. You see them today, like a lot of young adults today have poor social health. The one story that always strike me, I listened to some of my young adults talk one day, and they was talking about being with their significant others, and they was texting, and I was like, hold on, slow down, like I missed something. I was in different rooms. Said no, we was walking down the street. I said, y'all were walking down the street together, texting each other. I said, wow. I was like, wow. I was like, now I see why you got so poor social health. Like, there's no real communication there. I'm like, that's the time that you should be talking and using the different flexions of your voice to let this person know that you care about them. And this is the time I learned to be verbally intimate. And, these are things that I talk to him about, but I said, all that comes with age. He's like, well, I'm not this, I'm not doing that. I said, okay, as long as I can plant the seed now, and just let it grow, You'll start seeing the difference.
Can you tell us something about the work of the Justice Policy Institute, Tyrone, and how you came to be working for them?
Oh, I came to the Justice Policy Institute from the Georgetown Pivot Program. That was my internship. The Justice Policy Institute is a nationally recognized nonprofit organization, and they do research on criminal justice issues. And based off the research, the first thing we do is inform the media, lawmakers, other advocates, and community members, and talk about the research. That I learned so much through that process. I was just coming home, and to be thrown into that internship and actually thrown into the real work, it changed the way that I looked at advocacy. I was a huge self-advocate, but it taught me how to help people in the community, how to advocate for self. And I found a lot of gaps in the work in the policy space. And the biggest gap I found was that people in the community don't understand why they voting, who they really voting for. And a lot of people have never been civically engaged other than casting a ballot. I asked you, why are you voting for that person? Well, you saw a million commercials of them, right? That's not a good reason to vote for a person, right? And I started really understanding when people asked one time, we was out in the field doing some work in Baltimore, and they asked, like, how can we get involved? And the normal answer is, we can help you with testimony. And I said, internally, like my stomach knotted up, like that's not the right answer. So I decided to go back to school to learn more about social policy and social justice and understanding government structure, so I can tell people how to effectively advocate. And to start with issues like, if this person is not representing the issue that directly affects you first, then your family, and then your neighbor, then your community and your ward, your sectors, or whatever you live in, then you have an issue. Talk to them like, this is how you figure out how to vote for the right person that represent the issues that you care about. And on the reverse side, this is what you do to get this person out of office if they're not representing the issues that you care about. So
what kind of research have you been involved in, Tyrone, for the Justice Policy Institute? Or what kind of projects do they do?
Well, I'm no longer at the Justice Policy Institute. When I was at the Justice Policy Institute, we did a lot of stuff on like young adult work. That's how we knew that Maryland incarcerated the most young adults than anybody in the nation. In Washington D.C. in the U.S. They do things around from the juvenile justice system to the adult system. Every effort of reform that they work on. So how you learned about me was through Mark Howard, who is my boss. Mark is the co-founder of the Georgetown Pivot Program, which I was a student in. And Mark is the founder of the Georgetown Prison and Justice Initiative, which I am the director of Reentry service of.
And can you tell us a bit about your role there, in terms of what that entails?
Well, it entails helping people who are currently incarcerated with needs assessments and identifying resources for them while they're there. And so part of the things that we do here is the Georgetown Prison and Justice Initiative have the Prison Scholars Program that's held at the Correctional Treatment Facility, which is one of the jails that DC had, but DC no longer have a prison. So we teach in credit bearing classes and non-credit bearing classes inside of one of DC jails. I'm also a graduate of the Scholars Program. I got introduced to Mark Howard, Josh Miller, Aaliyah Graves Brown, Pietra Ribley, Alyssa Lovegrove, Professor Neil Rowland. I mean, it was so many of even the Dean Paul Almeida from the McDonald School of Business. I met all of them while I was at the correctional treatment facility. And so Dr. Miller asked me if I wanted to participate in the Georgetown Pivot Program. And I was like, what is the Georgetown Pivot Program? He said, well, it's a entrepreneurship / internship program, and said, we'll pay you. And I was like, hey, stop. And he said, hold on, I didn't feel. I said, stop. You just told me you're going to pay me to go to school. I'm like, we don't need to talk anymore. You're going to pay me. And he was like, he started laughing. I said, no, I'm serious. You told me you're going to pay me $17 an hour to go to school to learn. I said, right now I make $33 a month. And I'm working, but you're going to pay me to learn. So that's how I got connected with Mark Howard through the Scholars Program. Then I graduated from the Pivot Program after I was released.
Let me see if I've understood this correctly then, Tyrone. So all these people you were just mentioning, they came in to the prison and they're looking for contacts. Is that right?
No, they came into the prison to teach people.
Right.
I often tell the story, even when I'm on Georgetown, and I said it's so wonderful. From my view, it's different because I was at one of the jails when Georgetown came in. I said, so in my view, you see these professors coming down from the hilltop to meet people where they are, to care for them in the condition that they're in, but to make them better people.
So they came in to teach.
They came into the jail. They came in to teach.
And you were one of, I would reckon, a few who were interested. Is that right? I mean, I guess they don't get it.
I was one of many who were very interested of being a part of. I mean, growing up I'm born and raised from the District of Columbia. The only thing I ever did in Georgetown was shop. I never thought about going to school at Georgetown. And so to have a certificate from a prestigious institution and to meet the professors who come to teach and share their time with you. I don't know if Professor Howard told you, Naomi, when y'all interviewed him. He's so passionate about people who are currently incarcerated and changing that. When we used to come to his class, when I was still at the Central Treatment Facility, he would wait in the hallway till all his students made it into his class. And he would give all of us a hug as we walked through the door. He wouldn't start class till all his students were sitting down. That was something like we have never encountered. And like, man, he's staying here every week. You know, he's standing there waiting on us to come in, and he giving us all a hug.
So something about his warmth and human contact that he offered to you.
Yeah, not just education, but he was offering a piece of himself. You know, and even today he's not afraid to do that. We colleagues, right? He see me like, give me 5, and he, you know, we always hug. And I always tell people like that set Georgetown apart to me inside of the jail.
What did it feel like to you the first time he went to offer you that hug?
It actually felt good, you know, like, because sometimes, like, David, you got to think that so many people incarcerated go a long time without even human contact. You know, and like some people don't know if to touch you or not. And to know like every week I know I'm gonna get a hug from Mark. If I don't get a hug all week, I know I'm gonna get one from him. And that feels so humanizing. And then he get on with the teaching, and like we all embraced that brand of Georgetown. All of us who were in these classes embraced that because, we felt welcome. We felt like we was a part of. So many times people incarcerated don't get asked, what do you think? They're always telling you. When Georgetown came in, they was asking us, what do you think? Like, let me hear your thoughts. Like, okay, yeah. And I agree with, it was a very different conversation. The teaching styles are different. So now, early on when we first met, I was still at Fort Hays State. Now I'm at school at Georgetown. It's just the people you meet.
Sounds very special.
Yes,
and I think that's one of the things that's been nice about this conversation today, to hear about, say, Mark Howard, but also Lucius McCoy, and how these two people offering you very special relationships, both mentoring you in different ways, but how life-changing that's been for you.
Yes, it's just like, it's not even with Mark. It's been all the staff, the different faculty members, like they all embrace you, and it's like you really a part of something, and you're a part of a very larger family, and the values, they really grow on you. And so many, like all our colleagues, not only was it Mark Howard, but his partner, Dr. Miller. That was the one who identified me early on and say, hey, that's the one that interviewed me for the Pivot Program. He was the one that was actually giving us I took a lot of his classes. And he pulled me to the side, and I noticed that you're well-read. You remind me of a student on campus, like you. And he the one provided me the opportunity, and Mark agreed with him that they admitted me into the Pivot Program. I was in the first cohort. And it was Dr. Miller who constantly called me and like, hey, you need to finish your schooling. You need to go back to school. So he was the reason why I wound up going back to school after I graduated from the Pivot Program. He had actually wrote me a letter of recommendation and everything. So I met some very special people.
It sounds like it, and I suppose I kind of feel like I don't need to ask the final question, Chico, because I'm wondering whether you've just really answered that. In thinking about when people are traumatised, they often try and avoid things that remind them of their trauma, but you haven't. You're keeping yourself engaged in the very thing that's been traumatising to you. And so I was wondering how you kept yourself psychologically healthy doing this work, but it sounds like it's the people and those really special relationships that have embraced you and made you part of the family. But unless, I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd want to add to that that's also contributed.
I mean, Naomi, that is a great question, because sometimes it's overwhelming, right? Because I still carry this huge burden of I left so many of my friends behind. So this is why I was so active in helping getting second look pass and made, possibly 600 or 700 people eligible. Not get out of jail free, but made them eligible. But it also did something special. It changes the mentality of the way they think. Now they know that this law can help them. They no longer thinking that I may never get out of prison. They know if they change their behavior and start doing some things that's showing signs of rehabilitation, that they ultimately can be released. That was very draining to be dealing with that, and I became so emotionally attached to it that even today it's still hard, because I still know so many people who are currently incarcerated, and the hard part is you can't help them all. You want to help everyone. You want everybody to have an opportunity, and you can't help them all. And at times, I have to like withdraw from it for a while. And I tell them like I'm not gone anywhere, but I just need to get away so I can recharge myself, right? Because I have to take care of me.
But you can really hear the passion in you, Tyrone, for the work that you do. And I'm sure that, in 10 years' time, someone is going to be doing a podcast like this, citing you as offering them the mentorship that helped them see their life differently and move on.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. That's been a great conversation. Really, really good to talk with you today and hear such an inspirational story.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Tyrone, because what Naomi and I have been seeking to do over the past year with these podcasts is to try and identify the key things in people's lives which make a difference. And I think you've given us a real insight into some of those things today.
Thank you, Naomi and David. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure having this conversation, and I just hope that I've said something that can help someone else. That's part of what Lucius taught me, just paying it forward. And like just being open and being honest about your feelings. And as I tell my mentees, but being respectful about it. Communicating with others and respecting others should be your first duty, like to respect others, treat others like you want to be treated, and speak to them in the same manner. So it's all right to be upset, it's all right to disagree, but we can say it in a better way. And if you can't do it at that moment, just take a moment, think about it, think about what you want to say, and then say it. And that person will have a better understanding of you and a greater respect for you.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks very much. I found that conversation with Tyrone really moving, actually. It was lovely to hear the way he spoke so openly about the impact of those relationships with Lucius McCoy and Mark Howard. There's something about him putting his vulnerability out there by making it clear that these two people have been so important to him and made such a massive difference to his life. And it reminds me of the conversation with Michaela Booth, where she was talking about someone spotting something good in her that enabled her to hang on to and feel that somebody believed in her. And you really got that sense from Tyrone also.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of thought we could sit down with him for hours and really work with him through understanding the minute detail of what actually made a difference to him, and particularly in his encounter with Lucius McCoy, who'd obviously provided him with a tremendous stimulus which enabled him to allow his own emotional articulacy to flourish.